Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Monday, July 14th, day 647 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emanuel Fabian. Thanks for joining me again, Manny.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi. With no ceasefire hostage release deal in the offing, the war in Gaza continues, and the Hamas-run Gazan Health Ministry today claimed that over 58,000 Gazans have been killed in the past 21 months of war. The toll cannot be verified and does not differentiate between civilians and fighters. In the past day, over 100 terror targets were struck by the Israeli Air Force in the Strip, and we'll hear what is specifically being targeted, as well as learn about an accidental strike near a Gaza water distribution point that reportedly killed several children. In Israel's north, the IDF seized over 3 tons of arms in Syria dating to the Assad-regime. And Israel's most advanced communications satellite was successfully launched into space from Cape Canaveral in the United States yesterday. We'll discuss all of this and more when we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emanuel Fabian. 5 IDF divisions made up of tens of thousands of troops continue to operate across Gaza, and dozens of airstrikes were carried out in the past days, but one in particular has captured international attention, and that is a strike near a Gaza water distribution point that reportedly killed several children. The IDF said yesterday that it was an accident and attributed it to a technical malfunction. So, Manny, what can you tell us about this particular strike?
So what we're hearing from health officials in Gaza, this strike killed 10 people, including 6 children. And the IDF in response, when it was asked about what this strike even was, why is it targeting a water distribution point in central Gaza, it said that it had been trying to target a Palestinian Islamic Jihad operative, but there was a technical malfunction with the munition itself. And instead, the missile struck dozens of meters from the intended target. And an investigation has now been opened into this incident. I'll point out that this is not the first time this sort of thing has happened. I remember, I think almost a year ago now, the Israeli Air Force carried out a strike and the munition did not correctly glide towards the target as intended, and the missile then struck an area where soldiers were and killed a soldier. So this does happen. Since the beginning of the war, the Israeli Air Force has launched hundreds of thousands of strikes probably at this point, including in Lebanon and Iran and Syria and in Gaza. So many munitions, it's quite incredible. And statistically, not all of them are going to be perfect, and some of these munitions may have errors in them, and there could be some sort of technical malfunction and they don't target exactly where they're supposed to target, but it's a sort of a statistical error that can happen.
So the IDF was very forthcoming, in my opinion, in calling this an accident, whereas the reports that we're hearing of dozens being killed by the humanitarian aid distribution sites, the IDF has basically said over and over that troops are only firing warning shots, and in reviewing the incidents, they found no evidence of anyone hurt by its soldiers' fire. So does that make you think, Manny, that these reports that the IDF is indeed not shooting at these humanitarian sites, or at least not purposefully, that the IDF is actually speaking truth in this situation?
Well, the IDF is, I think it's important to put a distinction. The IDF is saying it's not intentionally targeting civilians at the aid sites and troops are firing warning shots, but it does admit that its fire could have hit people. But the bottom line is that the army says that Hamas's claims, the tolls that the Hamas claim, are not, I would say, they don't match up with the army's information. There were a few incidents several months ago where IDF artillery fire, both from the ground and from Navy vessels, that hit civilians near the aid sites, and the army says that this was also accidental. The artillery fire wasn't accurate. It was supposed to only warn civilians from approaching certain areas, but it actually hit people. But the army does admit in those cases. But the claims that every day that 30, 40, 50 people are killed near the aid sites, the army is saying that those numbers are indeed exaggerated, and it's possible that some of its warning shots did hit people, but not to the extent that Hamas is claiming.
Okay, so there are 5 divisions still working throughout the Gaza Strip. And as we noted last week in a podcast, the IDF has captured something like 70% of the Strip to date. There is no deal on the offing. And so what is happening on the ground in Gaza right now?
So not too much fighting is taking place, but there are a few, I would say, hotspots. The main area where I think most of the army's focus is right now is Bet Hanun in northern Gaza, very edge of northern Gaza, just across from Sderot and Erez, that area. There are essentially 1.5 divisions operating in that area alone. It's an area where the army didn't fully clear in previous raids, and it has operated in Bet Hanun dozens of times, but not in all of it. And there are estimates that there are dozens, somewhere around the 60 or 70 Hamas operatives still in the area, mostly in tunnels. Over the weekend, we saw a major wave of strikes in Bet Hanun. The army carried out, I think, 35 strikes in one area in just a very short while, mainly targeting tunnels in Bet Hanun. And in the past day, the IDF says that it also located a tunnel in the area and directed airstrikes on operatives who were trying to plant bombs on a road to try and ambush forces. And nearby, there's also operations in Jabalia, also a town in northern Gaza. There's been strikes carried out there, and the IDF has been pushing forward with ground troops, and additionally also in Gaza City, so in the neighborhoods of Daraj and Tufah, which is closer to the Israeli border, sort of to the east of Gaza City, and then also deeper in Gaza City in Zaytun and Shajaiya. Troops are operating in those areas. But that's where most of the focus is. And if you look to the south of Gaza, very little activity, a little bit in Rafah, a little bit in Khan Yunis, but not as intensive as we're seeing right now in northern Gaza.
So we discussed over the past 21 months the idea that the army is going to extend the buffer zone across all of the borders that are on the border with Israel, obviously. And I just wonder, have all of these locations been flattened? And if so, how deeply into Gaza at this point? Do you have any idea, just so we can conceive of the map?
Right, so the buffer zone along the Gaza border is around 2 kilometers, and it has mostly been flattened already. There are some areas where the army hasn't completed flattening it, but it's slowly doing it. It's a long process to do it safely, of course, to make sure troops are not hurt. But essentially, the 2 kilometer zone along the Gaza border is flattened, and then in addition to that, the zone extends even further out in Rafah. So between the Philadelphia corridor and the Morag corridor, which is between Rafah and Khan Yunis, the army is also flattening that area as well. Rafah essentially doesn't exist as a city anymore. It's been mostly razed at this point. Nearly all the buildings in the city have been razed. And the army is, under the directives of Israel's political leadership, have basically been instructed to include the entirety of Rafah as part of Israel's new security zone or buffer zone along the border.
Okay, so a proposed plan to establish a humanitarian city in this area that you described, basically Rafah, continues to, of course, receive backlash. And according to the plan, at least 600,000 Palestinians would be allowed into a newly rebuilt area or some kind of tent city plus after being cleared that these individuals are not Hamas. Just to remind our listeners, Rafah is on the border with Egypt, and the idea is as well to allow these individuals the choice of remaining in Gaza or leaving the country. Now, some critics, including former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, allege that it is at this point resembling a Nazi concentration camp that was built during World War II. These are statements of the former prime minister. But the IDF also has sharp criticism, according at least to leaked reports from a security cabinet meeting last night. So what are we hearing from the IDF according to these reports?
So according to these reports, the main issue that the army has is that it will take just too long to construct this sort of thing. Katz's idea when he spoke to reporters was that during a potential ceasefire, we're talking about a 60-day ceasefire that's currently being discussed. During that time, the new humanitarian city, or you can just call it a tent camp, would be built. And the army is, according to the military officials in the meeting, said that it would take 3 to 5 months even to begin from the moment the construction begins to the city being operational. And I've also heard from some officials that and various reports that the army doesn't want to really get involved in this because it's essentially de facto a military administration over Gaza. And the chief of staff, Eyal Zamir, has repeatedly said that he does not want the army having to sort of deal with civilian matters and hand out aid itself and deal with the civilian population. Katz's idea has, when he spoke to reporters, said that it would be the army securing it from a distance and other bodies would be the ones actually running the tent camp area, likely referring to GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, currently carrying out the aid distribution. But there are reports that sort of see this as, if the army does establish this sort of thing and is securing it, then it is essentially in control of 600,000 Gazans living in this area, or however many more enter this area, and the army doesn't want to have to deal with those sort of things. It wants to focus on fighting Hamas and less on dealing with civilians in Gaza. So those, I think, are the main criticisms of this plan. And I even just saw now a post on Twitter, on X, from Itamar Ben-Gvir, the national security minister, saying that this the whole humanitarian city thing is a spin and it won't happen. So you're even seeing from the right wing as well, not just from the left like Ehud Olmert, but also from the right, coming out against this plan.
What is confusing to me, Manny, though, is when we heard about the rollout of Gideon's Chariots, part of that plan was to siphon off Hamas and allow people to move from one point to another. So this tent city aspect of it, what is so controversial about it is, I suppose, that they can't leave this area anymore. Is that the big change between the Gideon's Chariots rollout and this particular humanitarian city idea?
Yeah, there's two main controversial parts to it. One is that Katz said that civilians who enter this area will not be allowed to leave, which, to Israel makes sense, because you want to make sure Hamas people aren't entering, but then you don't want anyone to leave afterwards and then, go back to areas which are under Hamas control. Israel wants Hamas to not be mixed up with civilians anywhere in Gaza. That's the idea, but it's definitely very controversial to not allow people to leave afterwards. And the second part is that it's being constructed and secured by the Israeli army. And this is the main reason why many aid organizations, including the UN, have come out against the GHF, because it was constructed by the Israeli army and it's in IDF operational zones, and the IDF is securing the area from the sort of outer envelope. And the UN doesn't want to have to work with the Israeli army for their reasons. Previously, these humanitarian areas and tent camps were all in areas which are sort of controlled by Hamas, or areas that are not controlled by the IDF. So those, I think, are the main controversial parts. It's an Israeli-controlled area and civilians aren't able to leave, which is definitely something that aid organizations will not want to take part in.
Okay, let's go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan with our military reporter, Emanuel Fabian. Israeli troops found more than 3 tons of weapons while raiding military facilities inside Syria. The sites had been maintained by the Bashar al-Assad regime. The weapons found by troops included anti-tank mines, explosive devices, and rockets. So to me, 3 tons sounds like an awful lot, right? But can you give me some kind of perspective on how much this is? Meaning, how many mines, how many rockets, etc.? Is this a huge cache?
It's a huge cache. Yeah, from the photos I saw, there were dozens of crates, and in each crate were dozens of mines. It just quite an astronomical amount of weapons. There was also footage of an old APC that was found in the area, and at least a few dozen rockets as well that were found. And of course, in addition to all these 3 tons of weapons, there was also military equipment that was also found. It's the area where this was found, I think, is more notable. It's actually quite far from the Israeli border. It's at least 13 or so kilometers or 14 kilometers from the buffer zone, from the edge of the buffer zone, which is where Israel is holding. But if you look at it from the Israeli border, it's something like 23, 25 kilometers away. So pretty deep. In terms of Damascus, it's about 20 kilometers west of Damascus. So we're definitely one of the furthest areas that the IDF has operated in inside southern Syria since the beginning of Israel's operations there when the Assad regime fell in December. And the IDF said that this operation is intended to prevent weapon smugglings from Syria into Lebanon for Hezbollah. Of course, this military site it's in the Hermon area, but it's very close to the Lebanese border. And that's an area where frequent smugglings would take place for Hezbollah. It's been a bit more difficult for Hezbollah recently because of the fall of the Assad regime and Iran being weakened, and so it's definitely more difficult. But there are still weapons in Syria that various groups will try to essentially move from Syria into Lebanon. And this facility definitely with 3 tons of weapons, and it being just a few kilometers from the Lebanese border, was something that the IDF wanted to reach and confiscate and destroy those weapons to basically prevent them from reaching Hezbollah.
Right. I assume that if the IDF learns about their locations, then Hezbollah also knows about their locations. And I also assume that there are many other of these depots throughout Syria. So would the IDF be interested in continuing to have a ground incursion inside Syria, inside southern Syria, to collect these different depots? How long of a reach is the IDF thinking to have in this case?
So what I've been told by the army previously was that troops are operating in areas up to around 15 kilometers into Syria. I'm not sure if that means 15 kilometers beyond the buffer zone or from his official Israeli border. But I don't think Israel would send ground troops even further to collect weapons. The airstrikes might be carried out in other cases. I'm not sure why the army went to this site instead of striking it from the air. Maybe because it's cleaner to just go and collect the weapons. Not have to bomb the area, especially as there's ongoing talks with Syria right now for potential, I'm not sure if I'd call it normalization, but some sort of diplomatic ties between Israel and the new regime in Syria. And that's why the army's carried this out. And maybe perhaps under some agreement, Israel will stop carrying out these raids and withdraw back to the official border and not maintain its positions in the buffer zone anymore.
Okay, let's go to something completely different than warfare. And Israel's most advanced communications satellite, which is called the Dror 1 or Dror Ehud, was successfully launched into space from Cape Canaveral in the United States yesterday. The satellite was developed by Israel Aerospace Industries, and it was launched into orbit by Elon Musk's SpaceX rocket. So just to tell our listeners, dror means 2 things in Hebrew: freedom, and it's also the name of a small bird. I think it's called a sparrow in English. So what does this satellite mean to Israel, Manny?
This satellite will give Israel communications independence, basically, for the next 15 years. Previously, Israel had to rely on other communication satellites that orbit Earth for various communications needs, mainly civilian needs or state official needs. And this satellite, the development began in around 2020, I think, just before the COVID pandemic it began. So I'm sure you can already tell that there's been quite a lot of challenges along the way. There was COVID, and there was the war in 2021 in Gaza, and then there was, of course, the October 7th massacre and the following war. And the developments continued throughout the entire time, and all the testing and everything that they needed to do. And we just had the Iran war, and during that time, the satellite was being shipped actually to the United States for its launch. So quite a lot of things along the way, but it continued regardless. And this satellite, again, it will stay in a fixed point above Earth. It will take about 2 weeks to reach that point, and it will basically orbit Earth in the same speed as the Earth is moving at 36,000 kilometers altitude, and will provide Israel's communication needs for the next 15 years. The launch itself was successful. I was able to watch from the IAI headquarters here in Israel. The huge team were all watching the launch and in communication with the team in the United States. And like you mentioned, Elon Musk's SpaceX, they used a Falcon 9 2-stage rocket. The first section, the first booster, landed back on Earth after it pushed it into space, landing on a barge at sea. And it had it was now I think the 13th time that this booster had been used. So it's a reusable booster. And the second stage pushed it deeper into space, and it opened. And sometime around, I think today, even around now, the satellite is beginning to maneuver into its fixed position, which will, of course, take 2 weeks. It needs to go around Earth several times in order to reach the correct position.
So for random Israelis such as myself, does this mean that my calls will no longer be dropped?
You have to check with your cell provider regarding that. But we don't know the exact, uses at this point. But the company says that this is quite a significant achievement for Israel, for national and strategic capabilities of the country. All the satellite communication capabilities that Israel uses for years to come will now be through this satellite independently without having to rely on anybody else.
Very exciting. Manny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.